Coming to paperback and e-readers, Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer. Take a trip into the macabre world of goth modeling in the new millennium in this all-new Spinsterella story. Pre-order your copy of Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer at Amazon.com and other online booksellers everywhere. One of my viewers left a comment telling me about how the editor of the Spider-Man titles in the 1980s was against the marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson. Now, Christopher Priest, who was going by the pseudonym Jim Owsley, was the editor in charge of the Spider-Man titles, and he was against the marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson, and was felt so strongly about this that he wound up quitting Marvel and quitting working as a part of their editorial. Now, this decision by Jim Owsley, as I see it, was a little extreme because when it came down to the marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson, it basically was the right decision for editorial to make as regarding the Spider-Man character, because the Spider-Man character basically hit a plateau creatively and had no place else to go. Now, as a writer who's been in the craft for over 30 years, I can tell you that sometimes you have to make a change to a character in order for that character to start to actualize their potential or for them to reach a new audience. Sometimes a character basically hits a point where they basically start to stagnate, and when they hit that point, it basically, you have either a choice to either adapt the character to the current era, or you can let the character continue on a course where they wind up going nowhere. Now, I myself have been in this same situation with many of my characters, and I remember where I was at that same point with the character of Esteem. Now, the Esteem character, when I first created her, was supposed to be an antagonist to Isis and was her main villain in my 2002 book, Isis, and the character, after she wound up getting killed at the hands of Isis in the climax of the 2002 story, basically hit a creative plateau where she basically went nowhere. And she went nowhere from another story I did where I brought the character back called The Politics of Hell. Now, that story basically introduced the Lucifer character, and as I introduced the Lucifer character, this took the Esteem character in a brand new direction. And as I took that character in a brand new direction, in 2005, I started working on a novel, The Temptation of John Haynes, where I would reintroduce the Esteem character, and after reintroducing the Esteem character in The Temptation of John Haynes, the character basically took a brand new direction that breathed brand new life into this character, that took it off that plateau and took that character to a whole nother level. And as that character went to another level, the Esteem character went from being a villain in the first Isis in 2002 to a tweener in The Temptation of John Haynes in 2005 to eventually becoming her own solo character in the Esteem series that I started in 2013, and ever since I had the character become her own heroine, she basically has become one of the most popular characters on the SJS Direct imprint, and that's all because I decided to, again, stop the character from being on a plateau and decided to take a character in a new direction. And as I took that character in a new direction, the character went on to go on to other levels creatively. Now, when you go out here and again change a character, sometimes change can again be very good for that character, because sometimes the premise that you originally had for a character has that character going nowhere, and sometimes you just have to go out here and make that shift in order to get that character to start moving ahead. I mean, I compare it very much to driving a stick shift car. When it comes down to writing, sometimes you got a character that just gets stuck in a gear, And because the writer doesn't know how to work the stick and move the character forward, the character remains stuck in that gear. But then when another creator comes on, what they do is go out here and start shifting the gears. And as they shift the gears, we're able to move that character forward. And as you can get to move that character forward, you can basically go out here and have that character go on to other levels, similar to the way that a car can go through the gears of a stick shift. Now, when it came down to the Spider-Man character in 1986, the Spider-Man character basically, as one of my Facebook friends, had gotten really stale. Even though we had gone through the symbiote story, the character basically fell back into a rut where the character was stuck in a state of arrested development, and the character was almost on the brink of cancellation, with stories like Gang War, which were not selling very well or performing very well. And this is where a new writer, David Michelinie from Iron Man, came in. Now, David Michelinie, back in the late 70s, basically revived the Iron Man character and basically turned that character into one of Marvel's top sellers and one of the big characters. I mean, he was the guy who introduced Jim Rhodes and Bethany Cade to Iron Man. It did the Demon in a Bottle storyline working with Bob Layton, and took that character from being a mid-card character to a heavyweight contender. Same thing with Frank Miller on Daredevil. Both of those creators basically, again, took those characters that basically were struggling over at Marvel and turned them into very popular characters. And sometimes you just have to go out here and get out of the box that a character is in, and again, get them into something fresh. And again, that's what a good creator comes in and does. They start shifting those gears, moving that character forward, and sometimes you have to go out and take a character out of what people used to know and put them into something different, and that's what can go out here and make that character interesting and relatable to audiences once more. Now, the Spider-Man character, again, was very relatable to teenagers back in the 1960s, and as the character became popular, he basically started growing up and going to college, but eventually he basically reached a plateau after the whole Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends era and the college era. The character basically hit this plateau, and basically Jim Owsley or Christopher Priest didn't understand that sometimes you have to make a character make a move to move them ahead. You have to make a character make a move to basically make them appealing to a new audience, and that's basically what was done with the wedding of Peter Parker and Mary Jane did. It took the character out of the rut that he was in creatively, because you had already done the symbiote costume, you did the black costume. Now it was time to basically, again, we had Peter Parker who was becoming a young adult, and the next step for a young adult who has a girlfriend is for him to go out and get married. That's the next step for a young adult who's growing up. They basically, again, this is their road to manhood. I mean, he is Spider-Man, and part of being a man is getting married. So that basically allowed the character to start growing and the character to start making those moves that would make him more relatable, because the whole idea of a college student basically being the same forever, that's not something that was really selling to most audiences of young urban professionals in the 80s. No, many of the young urban professionals, basically, they were not relating to Spider-Man, and many of the kids who saw the yuppies on TV, we weren't relating to any of these Spider-Man stories where he's still at Empire State University, and again, he's not really making any growth compared to the books that he did in the 70s. Now, we saw Peter Parker, again, he graduated high school, we saw him graduate college, and the next step for a young man basically is for that young man to go out here and start thinking about marriage. Again, in the 70s, he had proposed to Mary Jane one time, and she turned it down. And basically what they were looking to do was say, hey, we got to move this Spider-Man book along. We got to move this Spider-Man book along. And it was the right decision. It was the right decision because it turned Spider-Man from a book that was struggling to sell to one of the biggest books next to X-Men. I mean, Spider-Man basically went from a book that was selling 250K to about selling 500 to 750K a month under David Michelinie, and Todd McFarlane basically turned that entire book around. And sometimes the decision to move a character forward is the decision that will again start accelerating that character's interest with readers and start to get them to grow. I mean, I know this from experience, from my own experience working with not only Esteem as related to bringing her character back from the dead and bringing her character to a brand new and more abundant life, but I did the same thing with the John Haynes character. The John Haynes character was a character I created way back in 1990. Back in 1990, I created the character as more of a Saved by the Bell type character with teenage antics, and it just never worked. And in my 20s, I tried to do a different thing with the character with a more contemporary type story, but it didn't work. But when I did The Temptation of John Haynes, I again took the character and took them to another level. And basically, this was one of the defining stories of my career, and I wouldn't have been able to do it had I stayed in that neutral box. Had I stayed in the neutral box and didn't think about making changes to the character would have stayed the same, similar to what could have happened to Spider-Man had he not married Mary Jane. A lot of editors in comics at Marvel, again, like Joe Quesada and Christopher Priest, they thought, oh, this is a bad decision, but sometimes you have to make changes in a character in order for that character to grow. Sometimes you have to make a change to a character in order for that character to start reaching their potential and starting to actualize their potential as related to storytelling. Sometimes you have to go out here and shift the gears as related to that character, moving them out of the original premise that you had into a new premise. Sometimes you have to do things that people would not expect to get people's attention, because the wedding of Peter Parker and Mary Jane in 1987, this was what some people wouldn't consider a major event at Marvel, because we had Secret Wars 2 the previous year, I think. But the whole thing is that whole move basically, again, made Spider-Man fresh and new for Gen X and many millennials. Many Gen X and millennials were basically picking up Spider-Man once again, while in a world where X-Men was basically dominant. I mean, X-Men was selling the best-selling book at Marvel, but thanks to moves by writers like David Michelinie, Spider-Man started to become the #2 book. And eventually, Peter David came on and made the Incredible Hulk strong. And sometimes, again, you have to move a character out of familiar elements, and you have to go out here and take those type of risks that people would consider to be unpopular to gain popularity. Now, many of these comic book editors, they want to keep Peter Parker in a state of arrested development right now, and that's basically harming the character. It's harming the character because, again, Peter has no girlfriends. Peter has no interest. He basically is a guy just sitting on a couch. And again, for a character who's almost 60 years old, it gets really old and really tired after you've read stories about him having fun in a marriage. You've seen him having fun in relationships. I mean, people wanted to see this growth and progression. They want to see growth and progression with characters, and this is one of the things that the comic book industry doesn't understand, that I understand as a novelist and a screenwriter. Sometimes you got to do things that to take risks to bring a character to life, because yeah, you may introduce a character one way, but they can't stay that way, because if they stay that way, what they're going to do is plateau. And the only way to grow a character, sometimes you have to go out here and take a character and move them ahead. That's what I had to do with Esteem. I mean, Esteem basically was just a demon villain in ISIS, but she's so much more now in books like The Temptation of John Haynes, where she basically, again, walked away from being a demon. And now in the Esteem series, she's growing as her relationship with Christ. I mean, she's gone on to have really great stories like the Witches of Eastland, Poor Little Girl Lost with Brimstone Jack beating up demon strippers, and stories like Ascension, where she basically stopped being a demon and went on to take on the Hyena Woman and a Witch Girl coming up in this next book. Again, I've been able to grow this character, and move this character forward, and again, really was able to build a relationship with readers, growing that character forward. Same thing with the John Haynes character, moved him out of that Saved by the Bell premise into the supernatural one, and as I moved him into this supernatural premise, is where he's taking on the devil. And in this corporate hell of Morris Phillips, the character has grown exponentially from any far beyond what I thought with The Temptation of John Haynes, to stories like A Conversation with Death, to comics like At Death's Door, to the most recent book, A Thorn in My Side. Again, when a writer comes out of their comfort zone and comes out of that rut, they can come off that plateau and take that character to another level. And that's what happened here with Peter Parker and his marriage. What happened with Peter Parker and his marriage was something that allowed the character to grow, allowed the character to be able to move to another level and create stories that could relate to another generation of readers, the way older generations of readers related to the teenage Peter Parker. I mean, we got to see a Spider-Man from another era, and made the character relatable from generation to generation. And that's basically what you want to do with a really good character, is make them relatable from generation to generation. And the only way you can do that is if creative gets out of its own way. Sometimes you got to get out of your own way to let that character move forward, and that's what happened in the case of Peter Parker when he married Mary Jane. Again, Jim Owsley or Christopher Priest had to get out of the way, and that allowed the character to move forward and become relatable to a new generation of readers. Now, if you want to check out my first full comic, John Haynes, At Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com in paperback right now, and you can get yourself a paper copy for the same price as the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to check out Esteem's first full comic, you can check out Esteem No Good Deed on Kindle for just 99 cents, or you can pick it up in the back of the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past, and you can see how that character grew, starting with No Good Deed, and follow her stories throughout the Esteem series, all the way up to the most recent Esteem season of The Witch Girl. And if you want to see me talk about writing and talk about comics, or science fiction and fantasy, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Coming to paperback and e-readers, Esteem Season of the Witch Girl. The aspiring angel takes on a wicked teenage witch in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Esteem Season of the Witch Girl at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA, from the Black Boule, in this all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.